All right, here we go.
Here we go. All right. Well, my name's Tom Howes, and this is James Patterson. This is our second installment of our podcast relating to our book that we're writing called Why Postliberalism Failed. Well, we had some plans for what the second installment would be, but we decided that so many things have happened this week that James is about to tell you about that we figured we'd just talk about that that relates to our book. So James, why don't you tell everybody what happened this week?
So there were two major things that happened. They're actually somewhat related to what we were going to discuss anyway. So the two kind of work anyway. The first is that um, as a result of a defamation suit, I believe in the UK, some documents in discovery came out on Nina Power. She was actually, I think, suing someone. Is that it? Was she suing or was she being sued? I forget. I think she was suing
She was suing them. Yeah.
Turner. Yeah. So she was suing him, and the discovery they found that Nina Power had made many references to Nazi ideas, and it's sort of unclear how serious she was, but it was serious enough to get her fired from her job at Compact. And the reason why Compact is so important is that Compact magazine is a post-liberal publication, and this seems to be a problem with post-liberalism, is that they keep running into these people, and they keep hiring them and putting them in charge of magazines. That's bad. That's bad. We shouldn't have people who are memeing themselves into Nazism, which may be what she was doing. Again, it's hard to know how serious any of the stuff was, but it's bad enough to get her fired. So that's bad. The other thing is that the great Bishop Robert Barron, who does Word on Fire, he's done a tremendous amount of work uh, supporting the sort of American intellectual side of Catholicism, had invited on Patrick Deneen, who's one of the subjects of our criticism in our book. And Deneen actually recommended a few critics of liberalism. And when Bishop Barron's, was describing Orestes Brownson, we got from Deneen recommendations like Louis de Bonald, uh, Cardinal Louis Billet. I misheard him saying Louis Voulot. It doesn't actually end up mattering because of reasons we'll get into.
Mhm.
And Juan Donoso Cortez. And so for those of you who don't know who those people are, including, I suspect, Bishop Barron, was probably not all that familiar with them. He just sort of nods along because
Mhm.
Barron's like talking about Orestes Brownson. He's talking about St. John Henry Newman. These are good people to talk about, having criticisms of liberalism. And So he was probably assuming that's where Deneen's mind was. But Bonald was sort of like the French aristocratic equivalent of Ted Kaczynski. If you don't know who that is, that was a Unabomber. He wrote a manifesto that opens up with the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race,
Mhm.
and that's Bonald's position. He thinks Smithian economics and the emphasis on political economy had made people base, more violent. It had stripped the proper ruling classes of their position to preserve peace because of their capability for political virtue. It's just all nostalgia, and is refuted by any kind of history of French aristocratic behavior,
Mhm.
which was anything but peaceful and virtuous.
Mhm.
And a major problem that Bonald has was with the rise of a new class of men that he calls like those with like a small heart or something, like a small brained men or something like that.
Mhm.
And these are people that are obsessed with administrative rulemaking and laws. And the reason for these is that that's what you need if you're going to have a more egalitarian way of life. In a hierarchy, you don't need that because you have deference to superiors and they can kind of do what they want. Although it's not to say there wasn't any lawmaking, it just wasn't as central. Um, Among the new class of men were Jews, and Bonald does not like Jews
No.
at all.
At
He
all.
has a whole essay about Jews, describing them, their emancipation as in a 1806 article he wrote for the Mercury of France in 1806. He describes them and on the Jews as bad as the emancipation of the Black Frenchmen, which is double bad. Now we're racist and we're anti-Semitic, and that their emancipation from the ghettos had been a cause for great immorality and had provoked all kinds of indigence and of the French gentry who became indebted to them. And the French, of course, were the French Jews were not loyal to France but to Jews, so they were going to enable their foreign conspiracy to impoverish France to their debts and take over the country. That is a bad critique of liberalism. And before we get to the other two, I just want to say a lot of people were describing Bonald as having anti-Semitic ideas that were conventional and incidental to his thought, and this is simply not the case. Bonald describes a problem about Enlightenment way of life caused by the revolution, and central to this problem is the existential threat the Jews pose to France, in his opinion. This is not something that is just sort of like a casual anti-Semitic comment. This is not that kind of thing. It's also not severable from his critique of liberalism. It's at the core. If the end result of liberalism is Jewish domination of your state, that is not incidental. That is central. Okay, and he does not think it is incidental. This is not something he published in like a small journal or wrote in a letter to a friend. He published it because he was trying to provoke a change in the laws under Napoleonic control over France to deal with a problem with Jews in Alsace. So this was a policy change he was also trying to promote. And so it is Looney Tunes that anyone would ever recommend Bonald to a Catholic bishop while trying to describe the problems of liberalism. And the only thing that I can assume is that either Deneen does not know any of this, or he's doing something very wicked. So I mean, I don't mean to come down so hard, but this stuff is crazy, man. I just don't understand. I think it's much more likely that Deneen doesn't know, because the stuff we have on Bonald is and stuff like this. This book is actually off Ave Maria Press, called Sapientia. And if you go through it, it's none of this stuff actually deals with the question I just raised. They don't have on the Jews in here. And that would make sense. If you're a person who wants people to read Bonald, you're going to read the stuff that they like about Bonald. But he did not write this much. He wrote a lot more than this. It's so bad that like Bonald succeeds in getting the policy change made by writing this newspaper article, very long article, more like a magazine article, and it sets a tone for French anti-Semites thereafter. They use the same argument.
Yeah, they use.
Sorry, there's two others, but I'll take a breath.
Yeah, let's just pause on Bonaldo first. Now, it's part of the context though is that he mentioned 3 authors,
right?
And Bonald has some connection with some argument about the importance of marriage for society, and he said something about marriage, liberalism destroying marriage, or something in the interview. So
yeah,
maybe that's all he had in mind there, but he also added 2 other thinkers that were very closely connected in that tradition of anti-liberalism, right? And who are they?
Yeah, so the Bonald passage, I mean, essay may be talking about on page 73 of this book is on a proposal to abolish divorce.
Yeah.
Which, you know, on its own is fine as an essay. I mean, you can read it, but if you're going to recommend criticisms of liberalism, and you mention a person who's responsible for pretty virulent anti-Semitism, you might want to mention that as a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
If you go in, we were talking about this before. One of the people defending Deneen was Ed Fazer,
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Well, wouldn't you want to do this, warn people about Heidegger's Nazism if you were going to talk about his epistemology?" And the answer
Mm-hmm.
is, I mean, you might want to mention it. You should always mention when you're reading someone who was a professed member of the Nazi Party and a well-known anti-Semite,
Yeah.
because people might freak out that you're giving them this book.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's hard to say to how Nazism affected his way of thinking about the philosophy of ideas,
Yeah.
or how we know things.
Mm-hmm.
It might tie in. I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't asked. I don't really know a whole lot about it, but it seems
Not an
much less
obvious
likely.
connection.
Yeah. So the second person he mentioned is Cardinal Louis Billet, and in the clip, it's sort of mumbled, or maybe I'm hard of hearing. I don't know, but I thought I said Louis Voulot. But he says kind of under his breath Bulla, and it sounded like it's not like a hard T. I don't know. I don't know why I'm defending this, but because I mentioned, because in the original response I wrote on X was about Voulot, and so the Billet is a cardinal from the early 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
and was a member of the political party called Action Français, which is
Mm-hmm.
a proto-fascist anti-Semitic party led by Charles Marat, who was an atheist but wanted to create a coalition of right-wing Catholics, military officers, and others to
Mm-hmm.
oppose the Third Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And Billet, while writing as a member, wrote something called Liberalism, a criticism of its basic principles and diverse forms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem with this book is that a lot of it isn't his. It's a strange thing about this book. So this is why I said it doesn't matter if I got Voulot and Billet confused,
Mm-hmm.
because he quotes Voulot extensively.
Mm-hmm.
The two figures he talks about the most are Voulot and Billet. I mean, Voulot and Marat.
Yeah.
So Billet, like I joked online, hopefully shared his royalties from this with Marat and the estate of Louis Voulot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing about the criticisms of liberalism in here is that they're very familiar. By the time he's writing this book, they've been around for 100 years. They were the same as Bonald's.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, he actually does not talk about um, the Jews or Masons. These are the
Mm-hmm.
other group. The Freemasons are included in this conversation a lot. I actually got confused when I first read it. I was like, "Wow, the opening pages here have a whole lot about Freemasonry." Turns out this is the English introduction. So I made a mistake. So if you come across the English version that's available publicly in the Harvard Library through Google Books,
Mm-hmm.
just realize if you got to the part about Masonic liberty, that's Father O'Toole. I made that mistake, but in a way it doesn't matter, because he is a member of an anti-Semitic party
Mm-hmm.
condemned by Pope Pius XI in, I believe, 1924.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been 1922. I always forget.
Yeah.
And he is citing Charles Marat, who was the most vociferous anti-Semite in France
Mm-hmm.
and led the charge against Albert Dreyfus, another Jew from Alsace, like the one that Bonald was concerned about.
Yeah.
And the other person he's citing throughout the book at length is Louis Voulot, who was the middle 19th century's most accomplished French anti-Semite.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if you're reading a book and someone keeps citing like Hitler
Mm-hmm.
and Himmler and Goebbels, and they're not talking about the Jews,
Mm-hmm.
but they're talking about things that have to deal with Jews, like
Yeah.
liberalism does.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole time you're reading it, it's kind of like a freak out. Like you're waiting for it, and then it doesn't quite happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this is not a book I would recommend to anyone. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, so the thing is he
Mm-hmm.
was asked to leave Action Française and he refused.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Pope
all
Pius,
Catholics were asked to leave it, right?
yeah, and he refused to leave, and so the Pope like gave him like 7 or 8 chances to leave, and he refused, and so
Mm-hmm.
he was stripped of the cardinalate and
Yeah.
was demoted from bishop.
Yeah. Or technically he resigned, but because he
Yeah,
wouldn't, that was his only option if he didn't refuse. Yeah. Or he didn't refute them or leave the Axiom Francais.
yeah, and do not recommend people this guy. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's Looney Tunes to recommend someone who was so committed to the anti-Semitic monarchist party of Charles Marat that they
Hmm.
defied the Pope. I mean,
Yeah.
are you kidding?
Yeah. No,
Are you
it's,
saying this to a Catholic bishop?
yeah. So, James, for those who aren't aware, Action Francais was a proto-fascist party. They they never actually came to power, right? Although they
No.
yeah, so how would they compare to the ones that came to power around Europe, like the fascists in Italy or the Franco's party in Spain or the Nazis in Germany?
So the closest that they got to getting into power was at Vichy
Hmm.
during the Second World War with Pétain. And the reason why I say they didn't really come to power is that largely they were autonomous to conduct their own affairs because France had been conquered by Adolf Hitler. Hitler had taken what he wanted of France and left a rump France so that he wouldn't have to manage it. And
Hmm.
Pétain and the Action Française former members were very happy to serve under Pétain,
Hmm.
even if it was a diminished France.
Hmm.
So what makes them different is that they are from the Italian fascists is that Mussolini came into power in the 1920s largely by force through paramilitary attacks on Rome. There's this march on Rome he does, and it freaks out the king. And the king demotes the prime minister, makes Mussolini prime minister, which he remains until he's hanged from a streetlight.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, and he is not religious.
Hmm.
He is an atheist, and his fascist squadristi are not religious either.
Hmm.
They are by and large a literal kind of national socialism,
Hmm.
not in the Nazi sense. He doesn't have that anti-Semitic obsession, the obsession with the Romani and Lebensraum, all the Hitler stuff.
Hmm.
Um, John Gans calls this the jock nerd duality of fascism,
Hmm.
where it's either like a total jock or a total nerd that runs your fascist party. And
Yeah.
in the paradigm is that Mussolini is the jock
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
Hitler is the nerd.
Yeah. So
Um,
would you say that Action Francais is actually worse than the fascists in Italy because they have all that anti-Semitism and all of that they bring to them?
yeah, yeah. What they don't have is the paramilitary stuff.
Hmm.
And the
But they were
reason for
violent in that tension, right?
right, there was a lot of bad stuff going on, and of course there was the effort to use military tribunal to get rid of Dreyfus and
Hmm.
blame the decline of French military prowess in the war with Russia, the Franco-Prussian War,
Hmm.
on the betrayal of France by the Jews. Once again, the same
Hmm.
argument that Bonald made in 1806.
Hmm. Yeah. So Bonald's a big figure for this whole tradition of blaming the Masons and Jews for everything that
Yeah,
we
it
have
it's
people like Marat and
yeah.
yeah,
There had
Bill
always been
like
anti-Semitism in Western Europe.
yeah.
It's just that it takes on its modern form in large part because of people like Bonald and Voulot, and there's a few other figures that I describe in the book, real charmers.
Hmm. Hmm. And you see that same rhetoric not only with the Nazis, of course, everyone's aware of that. And the Nazis themselves actually really believed this, all this stuff, all of them
Mm-hmm.
to the end. Hitler believed it, everyone.
Yeah,
Um,
down to their bones. They were
yeah.
wicked men.
And then Franco also believed this stuff.
Yeah, Franco was a big believer in what was called the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy,
Hmm.
often pegged onto the end as Judeo-Masonic Bolshevik conspiracy.
Hmm.
And in the early years of him taking over Spain after he wins against the communists, and imagine that. Imagine you had to choose between a paranoid fascist or a bunch of anti-clerical communists. I mean,
Yeah.
Spain really got a raw deal. Uh,
Yeah.
but
We can
so
relate to that at a smaller level now, I guess, but I don't. We
so
got it
the
better than that, I guess, but
so Franco was a big believer in this stuff. He really did believe that there was an international conspiracy of Jews and Freemasons that sought to undermine the greatness of Spain. And this is what we were originally going to talk about today, which is that one of the primary sources for post-liberal criticism are these kinds of figures. And there's an old tweet joke, which is I worked on this article for 5 years and he just tweeted it out.
Yeah.
And that's very much the feeling I had when Deneen decided to just
Mention
say
these guys. Yeah, I thought the same thing. And that's why I think people were misunderstanding us. Like we just were closed-minded and couldn't take the good from the bad and all that stuff. It's like
yeah,
it's
it's
like,
all
no, you've
bad.
been talking about this for 5 years, and but Deneen was the clean one comparatively.
Yeah, Denis would never advise this. I mean, like you had like
Hmm.
Adrian Vermeule praising Carl Schmitt,
Yeah,
and
he's
Louis
also in this tradition.
Boulot, and yeah, another critic of liberalism. He sure was.
No, no, not just in this tradition, but also
Oh,
like the sort of anti-Semitic,
yes.
yeah, basic, all that stuff. And he was citing a lot of these same people that we're talking about.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing here is that they I don't really know. I don't know these people's hearts, but they can't
Hmm.
help themselves.
Hmm.
Like the problem with post-liberalism is that it once you become unwilling to accept certain elements of disagreement or imperfection in the
Hmm.
politics, that sometimes you lose some, sometimes you win some.
Hmm.
If you feel like the game is rigged in some way, you got to find out who's doing the rigging.
Yeah.
And the way that Deneen had locked that into place was rather than saying that there was anyone doing the rigging,
Yeah.
he was saying that liberalism as an ideology rigs the
Mm.
system. It just sort of
Yeah.
creates rules and mindsets.
Sort of this monster that floats through history and does all these basically everything bad that's happened in the last few hundred years is because of this liberalism monster.
Yeah, and it's Sam Goldman in his review in oh, what's it called? Oh man, it's put on the University Bookman. Described this really well as a Geistgeschichte, where like it's a history of the spirit. So the
Hmm.
spirit of liberalism is sort of like pushing people into all kinds of bad ideological conclusions. But once we're starting to make recommendations of people like Bonald, now it's not structural liberalism anymore. It's not
Yeah.
like the ideal. It's now we're talking about a guy who identified very specific people.
Yeah, that's right. So we're
Uh,
going back to the old post-liberalism where it wasn't about this free-floating idea, but about actual conspiracy of these
right.
groups that we don't like.
So
Yeah.
that conspiracy is called the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy, the one that we were talking about with Franco.
Hmm.
And it plays a very important role with the original post-liberals, people like the reactionaries in France.
Hmm.
Um, and that argument works like this. In the before times, we had Catholic monarchies, and
Hmm.
these monarchies were right and just. The arrangement of the Catholic monarchies was that the kings listened to the clergy when they provided moral instruction for how to rule, and in the absence of any clerical intervention, they can rule as they see fit,
Hmm.
provided that they're serving their people in a moral fashion.
Hmm.
Now, the history of Western Europe does not bear this out
Hmm.
as a starting point. Almost as long as we've had established churches in Europe, there has been a death match between the Vatican and Catholics and Catholic kingdoms
Hmm.
over who gets to be in charge.
Yeah.
From the sort of waning of the Roman Empire, the papacy is kind of one of the few institutions still functioning, so it's very
Hmm.
strong. And
Yeah.
then over time, the Holy Roman Empire, the Kingdom of France and England and Spain, they all
Hmm.
kind of begin, especially after Reconquista, they all begin to centralize, and the balance of power with the Pope starts to benefit royal positions.
Yeah, what they call modern territorial states start to form. So now the state actually has some power compared to the papacy, right?
Yeah, and with that, they've start to acquire expectations to intervene on episcopal appointments.
Hmm.
So they essentially nominate figures for the Pope to assent to, and then
Hmm.
they just start appointing them without papal assent.
Hmm.
And there was a practice called clerical immunity, where if you were a member of the church, you weren't prosecuted under royal law or any kind of civil law. You had to, and this is actually the firing up of a major point of contention here over papal supremacy during the reign of Boniface VIII. He issues Unum Sanctum,
And that's the
Uh,
beginning of the 1300s.
yeah, in 1302, and thus begins like 100 years of horrible relationships, anti-popes.
Hmm.
Pope is forced to go to Avignon. He
That's
comes
right.
back to Rome, and they're the anti-popes, and all of this ends with the more or less at the Council of Constance, the end of Unum Sanctum, with the issuing of the bull Haec Sancta. But that's another episode. My point is that the before times that the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theorists like to posit are purely imaginary.
Yeah.
Okay, it's an imagined past,
Hmm.
and that's part of the story.
Yeah.
So what happens is that foreign interlopers undermine this ideal situation,
Hmm.
and these foreign interlopers and Protestant versions of this are the Jesuits,
Yeah.
but in Catholic versions, it's Freemasons.
Hmm.
And so Freemasons are a fraternal order that started in the United Kingdom, originally in Scotland, as an extension of a real guild of
Hmm.
people building with stones. And when James VI in Scotland wanted to build a new church for the christening of his heir, you have a kind of creation of the lodge as a fraternal order there, and it makes its way south when James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England. So the lodge becomes this ecumenical group of Protestants, primarily not Catholics, excuse me, of Anglicans and Presbyterians, and it's also a little weird because the guild already had secret rites that are associated with membership.
Hmm.
And then there's during this period a very intense interest in Western esotericism.
Hmm.
So there's the inclusion of like Rosicrucianism and like reading Hermes Trismegistus. It's all this really weird stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and the Catholic Church hates it
Hmm.
because they see it as indifferentism. They see it as, and eventually the lodge really does embrace this sort of approach in France, but that's a whole other story. It comes to France
Hmm.
the Stuarts are kicked out during the English Civil War.
Hmm.
After the English Civil War, they bring the lodge with them. They create
Hmm.
lodges in France, and the lodges originally were very conservative. That's why Joseph de Maistre, like the sort of uber reactionary, the
Hmm.
original, was a
Hmm.
Mason. And he was a high ranking Mason in something called the Rectified Scottish Rite, which was um, a Martinist Masonic organization. And
Hmm.
Martinism is a kind of esoteric divination in which you attempt to experience the divine through rituals and
Hmm.
overcome the consequences of sin. It is weird. Okay.
Hmm.
And Meist was weird.
Hmm.
But after the revolution starts, especially once Napoleon becomes king or emperor, excuse me, get my royal titles wrong. The lodge increasingly turns into a kind of network of French influence
Hmm.
on the continent, which is why continental Masonic lodges are so different from like the guys with the fezzes driving the go-karts down the street raising money for hospitals. That's how we think of Masons, right?
Hmm.
There's a whole Stonecutters episode in The Simpsons where they're just
Yeah.
drinking like domestic beer. And in Europe, especially among reactionary Catholics, the Masons are like satanic
Hmm.
Luciferian high priests.
Hmm.
Okay, like it's not the guys at the Shriners Hospital. All right, that's not who it is. And because the lodge is international, it's a club that crosses national borders, and it's secret, even though worst kept secrets are like Masonic secrets. Like you can just go look every single thing that happens in a Masonic ritual
Hmm.
online. It's easy, but uh, what they begin people begin to assume that they're doing all kinds of terrible things there,
Hmm.
and in some cases they were. Like the Italian Masons were pretty terrible, and that also explains why the Pope kind of freaked out about the Freemasons so often, is because they were in his backyard. The worst ones were. But in France, you have a combination of persistent anti-Semitism
Hmm.
and a new sort of panic about Freemasons, and so they're considered relatively similar.
Hmm.
International organization of people who are more loyal to their own than to the nation.
Hmm.
And so it made sense they might as well be the same, hence why they're Judeo and Masonic. one other reason why they're considered very suspicious is they admit Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be a Jew and a Mason.
Mm-hmm. Whereas Catholics
So
aren't allowed. Well, they allow Catholics, but Catholic Church doesn't now allow them to become.
right, right. The Catholic Church has not allowed you to join the Masonic Lodge since 1738.
Mm-hmm.
And that did not stop anyone in France,
Mm.
including bishops.
Oh, including bishops. Okay. Hmm.
It wasn't until after the French Revolution where you had much more opposition to the lodge. But it's important to note that the Continental Lodges, especially the French Lodge, essentially break from the original Scottish and English lodges over faith. Scottish Rite and York Rite Masonic lodges require belief in God.
Hmm.
The French ones don't.
Oh, okay.
And that's really like the sort of point where they go in very different directions, and that's why the ones here are so different from the ones in France and Spain and the like. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here to defend the Masons.
No,
All
no.
right, I'm
Yeah.
Catholic. I have friends who are Masons. I ain't gonna defend them. I'm a Knight of Columbus. All
Yeah.
right, I take
And
out my sword and I will hit them with it.
yeah.
That's not sharp. It's but and they can, I don't know, like block with their aprons, like, no, anyway. So what matters is that post liberals used Jews and Masons as an identified group of conspirators who
Mm-hmm.
undermined the throne and altar,
Yeah.
who were otherwise blameless. And had there not been Jews and Freemasons, there would have been 100,000 Louis, all reigning a happy France.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so what they do is the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy, in their view, what it does is provide a tempting alternative to Catholicism, and that's liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
That is essentially the public face. That is the marketing of their political order that they
Mm-hmm.
want to use to undermine Catholic France.
Okay, uh okay, so that's a lot of background here that allows you to, I mean, this is part of the confusion that where people were a little bit, I think, misunderstanding what we were getting at. So in the last few years, as post-liberalism has become a thing, it started with Deneen, really, with his Why Liberalism Failed.
Yeah.
It doesn't give us any answers. It just says that liberalism's created all these problems and we don't like it, so we should go to local, get involved in local politics and our local communities, and then it doesn't really, and then maybe something else will emerge organically. Now, we all know, who have been paying attention to Deneen, he didn't really stick with that, and he's gotten a little bit more radical over the last few
Yeah.
years.
Regime
But
change really does point to that.
yeah,
His most recent book.
that's right. But the other ones that are associated with post-liberalism, Sohrab Ahmari, although he might, I don't even know if he calls himself a post-liberal anymore, but he was.
Yeah.
Adrian Vermeil, uh, uh,
Gladden
Gladden
Papin.
Papin, Chad Packnold, who I also think is distancing himself. To be fair, I think there's signs
Yeah.
of distancing himself from it. But they were more associated with the more sort of radical, or what would you say,
Integralist.
integralism, right?
Yeah.
That they embrace this Catholic political theology called integralism. And of those, Adrian Vermeil was sort of like the most radical insofar as he started appealing to all these older thinkers that we're calling the proto, post-liberals or whatever, like
Yeah, the first wave.
the first wave of post-liberals. He started citing all these thinkers. He started talking about Carl Schmitt, and then you started reading Carl Schmitt because you wanted to delve into that, right? So I
I
understand.
hadn't read Carl Schmitt since graduate school, and I read him very differently this time because of Adrian. It's he he brings out a side of Schmitt that I had not considered, and it makes Schmitt a much more insidious figure when you read him. Especially Roman Catholicism in Political Form is a very evil book.
Yeah, that's right. And the
When I
big,
originally read him, I thought he was just like he was like mad at Weimar and wanted someone to start making some decisions around here. It didn't really seem all that deep, but it didn't seem all that pernicious either. It just seemed kind of weird.
yeah, yeah. So then you have Schmidt. right? But then Vermeil also cites some of Schmidt's sources. He'll go back and he'll talk about a guy named what? Cortez?
Yeah, Juan Donoso Cortez,
Juan Donoso Cortez.
a progeny. I forget. He's like the great grandson or the great grandson of the explorer Cortez. I
Oh, I
forget,
didn't
but
know that.
yeah, I believe that's right.
Oh, okay.
What's funny is that if you buy this book,
Hmm.
um, uh, the version of it, it's just an old free version of it. I'm not sure if the person watching this, but I did not do that underlining. That's just in the original book. That if you can see the underlining there. So
Oh,
it's
I
a
couldn't
funny
see
thing
it.
about the publishers. They just took something off of Google Books and slap a binding on it. So I
Oh,
was very unhappy. I opened up the book and there's just, it's, yeah, it even says in the front of the book, Cornell Catholic Union Library. I bought this. I should not have bought this. This is
yeah.
free.
Hmm.
Anyway,
But one thing that, we've discovered reading more about Schmitt and the sort of, because everyone thinks about Schmitt like the friend enemy distinction, all that, which he,
yeah,
he draws a little bit from Cortez, right? I think Cortez
right.
is a big influence on him that in his decisionism, how he defends the Knight of the Long Knives. He says that the sovereign is the one who makes the exception, and normally when they're making an exception, it's not good. Um,
Yeah.
and
State of exception, for those of you who don't know, just simply means a condition in which ordinary constitutional order must be suspended
mhm.
because or like for some kind of like self-defense or
Yeah, so
emergency.
like the Knight of the Long Knives, he kills his political opponents, and he says, "Oh, he's just protecting the law." He says, right? And uh, so everyone knows Carl Schmitt's a Nazi, and he's no good, but he's famous. He was famous. He was pretty popular on the left, like the Marxist left in
Right.
Germany after the war, and it's only recently that he's started to become popular again with people on the right, which is really odd. And Vermeil is one of them.
To date myself, when I was reading Schmitt, it was taught to me by a left-wing professor,
Uh-huh.
and we were reading Schmitt, and then we would read Chantal Mouffe, who
Mm.
was writing on like Verso Press, right? Like super left wing academic press.
Hmm.
And their cause of interest in Schmitt was they wanted to get rid of Blairite labor and Clintonite liberalism, which they saw as weak
Hmm.
and too consensus driven. They wanted to a return of the political of ideological distinctions so they could
Hmm.
attack conservative enemies rather than and create some kind of consensus. And so
Hmm.
the person who is sort of emblematic of this change was Jeremy Corbyn,
Hmm.
right? He's a very stark leader of labor, and who must feel really bad because we're filming this on the day that we've discovered that the British Labour Party has got a majority, and it's not Corbyn leading it; it's Keir
Hmm.
Starmer. So
Oh, interesting.
uh, but yeah, that and they wanted people like Bernie Sanders, right?
Hmm.
Someone who's very like assertive, and what ends up happening is that people like Vermeule introduce Schmitt for the same reasons on the right.
Yeah, on the right. So it's come back full circle now. So
Yeah.
so but then there's this other side of Schmidt that nobody talks about because the secular, the people who aren't in the church are not interested in all. It's this weird papalism that connects him with that whole tradition we were just talking about of
Right.
like Judeo-Masonic conspiracy theories and but also the ideal of like sort of an integralist ideal with the Pope in charge, with the Pope having more political power, right?
Yeah, his model in Roman Catholicism political form for
Hmm.
dictatorship is the ultramontanist interpretation of the papacy.
Yeah,
He thinks that all regimes should imitate the Pope
yeah.
in temporal affairs. And at the end of the book, he even talks about how the Masonic order
Hmm.
that had, in his view, attempted to, but failed to undermine the church also has something to contribute in its use of political power, and that the church should learn from it. And what he means by this is this kind of raison d'etat, right?
Hmm.
of like this kind of Machiavellianism
Mm-hmm.
um, that he thinks they possess, a kind of conspiratorial mindset. The church should become conspiratorial
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in order to preserve its position atop um, the Vatican and the like. And what's so weird,
That's already like Cortez too, right? He says because the
right?
church is weak now, we need a dictatorship, right?
Yeah, I want to get the book. I don't remember when the book was originally published,
Mm-hmm.
but the Lateran Treaty was 1929, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Roman Catholicism in political form was out yet. But it would be hilarious if that book came out at the time that the Pope was still the prisoner in the Vatican. He's talking about, well, you should have dictators like
Mm-hmm.
the Pope who can't leave his own palace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know, but the joke only works if he wrote it before the Lateran Treaty. So
Now, another thing that I found out too is, that Schmitt really, like all the Nazis, really did believe this sort of Judeo-Masonic conspiracy thing. He really did believe it. People don't think that people think they just used this stuff, or no, they really believed it. um, and he, I found something recently that showed Schmitt, really drawing on this one author named, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Guénon or
Gwenon,
Guénon. What's that?
I'm sorry. Everyone gets to see my fat tuchus. Gwenon,
Yeah, Guénon.
Gwenon. Yeah, that guy's a weirdo.
So Guénon
Great.
writes this famous book around that time, right? In the 1920s or early 1930s,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what was he at? I remember because Carl Schmitt was influenced by him as well.
Yeah. So I know less about him. I read a lot about him a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
He was very interested
Mm-hmm.
in esotericism and patterns of esotericism that's discovered across different cultural channels.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his more controversial positions was that the Christian religion began as a mystery cult, and that the sacraments behaved more as rites of initiation than they do now, and
Mm-hmm.
that there's been a democratization of Christianity in a way that's made it lose its sense of um, magnificence
Mm-hmm.
and specialness. But baptism was an occult practice. The idea of eating God was an occult practice, and the spread of it and led to its diminishment. But at its start, it was much more intense for this reason. Now, it doesn't really prove this position; it's more
Mm-hmm.
supposition, and that's because, and this is a really underestimated element of the 19th century and the early 20th century, is that there was a lot of occultism.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of real interest in this sort of thing. And we talked about with Meist already. I mean, he was like, into mesmerism and animal magnetism and
Mm-hmm.
all these real goofy stuff. And Guénon was part of that same kind of like Western esotericism. He eventually converts to Islam, I believe, and because he sees it as more closely connected to these cults. I'm not sure if he became like
Well,
a Sufi.
that sounds like Hitler. Where he,
It does.
no, in the sense that Hitler, he said that because he used religion as an instrumental thing. Where he said he would wishes that they would that Germany would have been Islamic. I remember
Oh wow, I
because
never
he
heard
just
that
because
before.
for him the whole Christian he was obviously not a Christian. He just used it whatever he could use for his.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I
Uh,
think I'm right, by the way. It looks like Roman Catholicism in political form came out before the Lateran Treaty, which makes the joke really funny.
oh, okay.
Looks like, but I don't want to have to roll around my office and put my back to everyone. That's really
Uh,
rude.
no, it's okay. So that's the context, right? So
Yeah.
then now with all that said, we had a crazy 24 hours for you in all your research because that revelation about the editor at Compact, and I don't want to ruin people, it's public knowledge. We're not, it's already out there, her reputation's already affected. She actually had to step down. But
After having to declare bankruptcy because
and
she had to pay
yeah,
the court charges for the person she sued.
yeah. And so this isn't about,
Nightmare.
tearing down somebody who's already down,
Yeah.
but it's interesting to us because when they revealed her WhatsApp conversation, that was revealed as part of the evidence in this lawsuit, um, she's citing all these. I mean, she's talking about, oh, your guy Guinan, did that guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this all this stuff is, and then she cites this other book, which was about, I can't remember the name of it,
The
but it was
occult wars.
the Occult Wars, and it's really another one of those that tradition of the Judeo-Masonic
Conspiracy.
conspiracy
Yeah.
theories. And then she said, all this stuff. She said something along the lines of, all this stuff has me wondering if the protocols of Zion are real or something, and it was just like, it was just absolutely nuts, right? I think there's some mental instabilities issues going on there, but it's relevant because Compact was like the most well-known journal in the post-liberal world, because the editor-in-chief is post-liberal, the managing editors are post-liberal. I don't know if this lady, I think she calls herself, I don't know if she calls herself post-liberal, but she's a senior editor there. And
Or was.
it's just like, when I read that, because I'm reading manuscript, I'm reading, your manuscript, the part of our book that you're writing about a lot of this stuff, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I mean, wow, like, because you were connecting these two worlds based on what like Vermeil and a few other people were saying, and how there's some continuity between the two things. Um, but the fact that, I mean, that was revealed that she is like a true believer in this like
Yeah.
Masonic conspiracy thing. So that happens, and then a few hours later, we get the interview with Deneen, who's supposed to be like the moderate one of this group. He's the one who's never really brought up any of this other stuff. He just complained about liberalism, right? Um, he's bringing up as his examples of people who were proven right about liberalism from the 19th century. Those three people that we mentioned, that are all big figures in this tradition of the Judeo-Masonic, sort of conspiracy theorizing, reactionary, anti-revolutionaries, anti-liberals. And I mean, you and I right away were like, whoa.
It's weird. It's
Yeah.
really weird, but
It,
it just sort of points to the fact that this stuff is in there. It's
yeah.
bouncing around. People are making recommendations. So it's
Yeah.
not required that you believe in this stuff, but it doesn't seem to be discouraged.
It doesn't mean discourage. And for us, I don't think we wouldn't, neither you or me, we never claimed that we were sure that Deneen believed all that stuff. He might have very,
No.
but the
One
thing
of the
is
things
these are
about
the
Deneen
books
is
that
that
in their
he
group they're passing around. And
yeah.
if for us, it's just irresponsible to be passing around all these books without giving huge qualifications. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
It's
well, it's only this one part. He makes this good insight here. I disregard all the stuff about how this is the fault of the Jews.
and
No,
somehow it's our fault for pointing this out,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
and we're anti-intellectual because we don't want you to read Bonald. I don't think you should read Bonald. There's nothing in it that's really worth, that's really all that interesting that you can't find in a thinker who's, smarter and less anti-Semitic,
yeah,
like, like Fulton Sheen. My goodness, read Fulton Sheen on
yeah.
marriage.
Or we're reading Bonald now for academic reasons, but
Yes,
but we're
yeah,
not
of
going to be
course,
like, hey
research
guys,
reasons.
if you want to know like the people who were proven right here. That's
Yeah,
what
I mean, like, let's say what we know about Goebbels was that he
yeah.
was a fanatical anti-Semite and a great
Mhm.
cook. And it's like, do I want to necessarily recommend
His
Goebbels's
cookbook.
cookbook? Right? It's like, no, I don't.
And,
I
and
don't.
if
It's
I
like
do, I'm going to qualify it quite a bit so that
the
everyone's, so that young people aren't going and picking up these books.
that's right. You'll get a pork cutlet. So then you know who the Jews are. So it's like, this is the nonsense that we're having to fight against. People are like, I
Mhm.
can't believe you can say you would try to deplatform Denim because he recommended people who are
Yeah.
off the rails,
Yeah.
anti-Semitic.
And you didn't even say anything about deplatforming Deneen. You said we shouldn't be giving a platform for
To these ideas.
these ideas. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said to Phaser, all you got to do is just not include that clip, or especially don't clip it out and spread it on social media. I would just edit out the comment,
Yeah.
because we don't want people to read Billet. He's
Hmm.
not a good person. All right. He
Hmm.
he wrote a lot of really crazy stuff and
Yeah.
defied the Pope on Action Francais. He
Yeah.
argued things that you can find in better places with
Yeah.
people who did not join an anti-Semitic monarchist party in France. All
Well, it was
right.
like when everybody was rightly shocked that all these young people were citing Osama bin Laden positively. Like, hey,
Right.
a lot of good points. It's like that's you know what I mean?
Yeah. So
uh,
it really is a question of why these people? Why did he recommend these people?
yeah,
And the answer is that this is sort of like the air
what
you
they're
breathe in
reading.
post-liberal circles.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So even if Deneen is sort of naive and he doesn't realize some of this stuff, it's clear to us that this is what they're reading in their circles. And apparently, based on with this editor of Compact, some of them are true believers.
Yeah, the occult war is not for the faint of heart. If you've committed to picking up that book and reading it, you're already nine steps down a 10-step path.
Wow.
And that 10th one's a doozy, man. The occult war is, man, that is a rough book, dude. I don't know if I could handle reading the whole thing.
Well,
It's
she
really
was
nuts.
talking about like there being alien races and fairy race. I don't know. It was just nuts. And I don't, I think there might be some instability issues there, but like, yeah, this is what they're reading.
Yeah, and this is who's editing their work.
Yeah. So editing their work. Yeah.
And this is how you end up with articles, defending Alexander Dugin, right? Like,
Oh,
a declared fascist who defends Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It does remind me, though, that if you go back and look at all the old, what were they called? The women in England who wanted the right to vote. They had
The
they're like
suffragettes.
the suffragettes. A lot of the suffragettes, after they get the right to vote, they go like Mosley, right? Like a lot of them become fascists.
Really?
Yeah, I may be wrong, and so we may be airing error, and error has no rights, so I will be going to jail. But yeah, like there was this weird sort of connection between these two things. So maybe the fact that she considers herself like anti-feminist, so anti-third wave feminist,
Hmm.
means that she's the kind of wave of feminists that were attracted to Mosley.
Hmm.
Um, but I could check that while you talk.
Oh,
So
okay.
start talking and I'll check.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, that's that's the context for, we were accused of being anti-intellectual for making a big deal about it. But yeah, we don't, you know, we have no evidence that Deneen is a true believer in any of this stuff, and that's not any claim that we were trying to make. But he needs to be a little bit more careful, though, that he's not promoting these books without qualification to a bunch of his students and his followers.
That was what I said, and that is what you said,
Mm.
and um, that is the point. It is important for people to know much more about a lot of the post liberals that they refer people to,
Mhm.
because generally speaking, when you're dealing with 19th century counter revolutionaries and reactionaries, they're going to have something to do with this.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, and the reason is because it was a central component of the narrative they used to promote the positions they took, that there had been international interlopers that had undermined the right and good order before, and we're going to restore it on their backs.
Hmm.
And so it's very hard not to find this
Mm.
in someone's background. And there are some real gut punchers, right? Like,
Mm.
so if you're like a big fan of Alaire Belloc, right, and you love a lot of the things that he has to say, and then you read his 1922 book on the Jews, it's unhinged.
Mm-hmm.
And Chesterton has a lot of very dubious things here, and so the question then becomes: do we not read them? Are they? The answer is you don't platform those ideas, but in many cases,
Mm-hmm.
they could. They you can describe them, but it's always important to note that the reservations you have about other parts of their work.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the case of Bonald, it's like the central
Hmm.
position that
Yeah.
he wants to undo the Industrial Revolution.
Hmm.
And part of the reason why he wants to do that is because he doesn't think the Jews should have been emancipated.
Yeah. And I think it's also important that we're, sort of aware of this continuity of the tradition because I mean, they've been saying this stuff for 200 plus years. Um, and they've had a bunch of chances to show that they have a better plan for how politics should be arranged. And it doesn't have a very good history.
Yeah.
It always ends up with, a lot of injustice. I mean, there's just, I mean, so Patrick Deneen and the new post-liberals are a continuation of this. Don't expect them to be any more successful than the first, second, or third waves of this.
And I want to point out that there are some sort of theological integralists that I'm friends with. Daniel Lemon's a colleague here, and Taylor O'Neill actually used to be my neighbor when he was in graduate school here at Ave Maria. And they're well aware of this problem, and they do not support the anti-Semitism.
Yeah,
But I
a lot of
keep
them don't.
a lot of them don't, and I keep explaining to them, you're the ones who have to make the case.
Hmm.
Okay, like who's going to listen to me? And so it's a difficult thing to do, because a lot of the work that they would draw from to make the case for this sort of thing, they also regard as very bad. Like they consider it liberal. Um, and so this is an internal evolution to their thought that they need to make. And I can't make it for them because no one will listen to me. I also don't think it's possible. I think
Hmm.
in the effort to do that, what you will do is you will argue your way out of integralism.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of very good people on the opposing point of view that we take, and I learned a lot from them. And it is very frustrating when we try to make our points about these sorts of things, and people seem to like almost intentionally misunderstand or misinterpret them. And
Hmm.
maybe because they got caught doing something stupid,
Hmm.
and they should probably just say, oops, I'm
Hmm.
sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe I should not quote Bonald anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I also like, I think you and I both agree that identifying this real, because normally the sort of post-liberal narratives presuppose a real triumphalist view of like how things went down, and also
Right.
like that we had this sort of golden age and somebody took it from us, or this idea that since we don't want to be racist, this just idea floating in the air, this monster called liberalism,
Yeah.
which was a product of ideas from Scotus and Occam, you know, uh, had this control
The
and
Richard Weaver hypothesis. Yeah.
whatever. And this is nice. It's nice that they replaced it with this narrative because it's a
Yeah.
lot less, hateful. But it's still like that's like their, whatever that they're trying to do. But I feel like if you bring attention to like really the roots of this whole tradition, right? I think people can then become more aware of why the Second Vatican Council was so important and why
Yeah.
the church's embracing of some form of liberal democracy or something like liberal democracy, at least how the church it has qualified acceptance of it, is important, or else we aren't correcting those mistakes before. We're not we're going to be right back to where we were before. But
Yeah. And there are a lot of people who like to point to the reforms of the Second Vatican Council for creating all kinds of malfeasance that led to the decline of the church. But it's important to understand that the decline of the church had already begun in Europe.
mhm,
And the reason why the church had declined in Europe was because the church took sides. And
mhm,
when the church took sides, it took some pretty suspicious sides. All right.
yeah,
Like if you were going to have the church involved in politics in Spain,
mhm,
um, then you were going to have Franco's priests in charge. And so now
mhm,
they're stuck with these guys, and the Vatican can't really do anything about it. You have
mhm,
the Ustashi in Croatia during the Second World War.
mhm,
Oh, no, no, these are bad people. Okay. And so, like, these are all products of the Catholic Church really struggling with how it can integrate itself into a democratic age.
mhm,
And there were enough people fighting against that integration that by the time the church got there in the Second Vatican Council, a lot of harm had been done.
mhm. Yep, yep. No, I agree. And so um, yep, yep. So that's
Yeah, there's
right.
not going to
Right.
be a happy ending to this podcast. It's just going
Yeah.
to be, we're just going to be sad.
Well,
I came in sad.
well,
It's not been a good week.
hopefully some young Catholics watch it, and you know, they have some it has some positive influence on them to avoid some of these things,
Yeah. I hope so. I get into it with a lot of people online. I see a lot of kids who, seek out engagement by being based. and saying I'm up there talking about this anti-Semitism. They're like, wow, I guess I got to go read Bonald and Bill it, ha 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 ha. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, I understand you like to be a little edgelord.
Hmm.
We were all young once,
Hmm.
but
I wasn't
hopefully.
quite young like that ever, but
No, no, I wasn't either, but I knew kids that were like this.
yeah.
Hopefully they grow out of it,
Mhm.
and that the experience of talking to an old man might help them
Yeah.
help help them grow out of it. But for the time being, it's hard being right sometimes,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
we were proved right this
Yeah.
week. And I tell you what, I wish I'd been wrong. I wish I'd been so wrong that I would have quit this book. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it looks like we still have to write it.
Well, then I just seeing all the comments and responses to what we were saying. Yeah, just all these people basically saying like, yeah, so what? I mean, they're just it's just there's a lot of radicals out there, at least ones online or ones who are vocal. Some of them tenured professors at elite schools, which is even more troubling. Um, but um, but yeah, I mean that's where we're at with that. Um, and then this, I it was right after this happened, I found out like I got an update on Taylor Marshall. Have you checked in on
Dun
Taylor
dun
Marshall
dun.
recently?
We're at an hour, so we should close. But let's close with some juicy bits on
Well, I
Taylor
don't know. I
Marshall.
just I just found out because I haven't heard from Taylor Marshall because he's not really never been my cup of tea, but he just
No,
this like sort of like trad guy on YouTube like
yeah,
years ago. But now he's become the guy who counts how many Jews are in everything, somebody said.
we leave the Jews alone for
I
like
know.
a week.
Have you ever seen that video of the it was the Jewish guy making fun of the people who count how many Jews are in things?
No,
Oh, it's kind of funny. But
okay,
all these people, these memes online, right? Yeah, that
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Look, if you find yourself doing that or listening to this sort of stuff, just go pray.
Yeah.
There's nothing good down that road.
Yeah, there's
Okay, it
nothing
only
good.
gets worse.
Yeah, that's right.
They don't that it will not explain anything, and you will not feel better. You'll just have more spiritual baggage.
So what I guess I shouldn't um you can't be completely pessimistic though. We also got a lot of affirmation for these things, right? From some people.
Yeah, it was good that I got those.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, for whatever reason, when it comes to doing social media engagement, the bad comments always hurt more than the good ones.
That's right.
I think this is true for a lot of people. Um, you'll like you can get 100 compliments, but if one person says something bad, that's the thing you'll remember,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So it's probably just a little bit of that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
we even had people wanting to have us write a book on this, but we said we already are writing a book on this.
yeah, we got a what? Where was this guy? I went to a book agent about this, and he was like, "Nobody wants to read a book on that."
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah, well, Acton's gain, right?
So those listening, the goal is we have to sell more. Again, we have to sell more copies than Deneen's Why Liberalism Failed, and then we will know we succeeded.
That's right. That is why we are getting Joe Biden to endorse our book, the way that he had Obama endorse his, and the endorsement on the back of the book will say, "This doesn't taste like ice cream." All right, that's dumb. I'm so sorry. Hey, but we found a way to end it on a light note.
Yes, yes.
Unless you're like a
Anyways,
fanatical Biden supporter, in which case, my condolences. Um, um,
all right. Yeah, we should end it right there. So we look forward to see we aren't going to see you, but we look forward to you seeing us again on the third installment coming soon. So if you're interested, if you want, and what should we talk about next time, James?
let's kick it over to you. Let's talk about Pink.
Okay, yeah, sure. We're talking about Thomas Pink,
Thomas Pink, not the
who
singer Pink.
Thomas Pink, who has nothing to do with any of this radical.
No, no.
Yeah, he wants nothing to do with it. He's just
No.
off in a tower thinking about ideas. He's not concerned with any. He doesn't. He's against all this stuff. Positively against it.
Yeah,
So,
he's on his eighth time reading through the corpus of Suarez. All right,
yeah, that's
that's
right.
what Thomas Pink is doing.
That's right. In
He's
fact, I've heard from people who know Pink. who would say he's very much opposed to all of this stuff. So just I just want to make sure that's clear. All
Yeah.
right. All right. So then we'll just stop right there and we'll see well you'll see us next time.
Take it easy, guys.